Hi there. Fill rates and service levels are two common tools that supply chain managers often use to determine if they're fulfilling their customers' needs. However, despite being very simplistic to implement, they are often confused and even interchanged. Today on Lokad TV, we're going to clarify exactly what they are and also discuss what you can do to reduce stockouts and ultimately keep your customers happy. So Johannes, these two tools are sort of fairly confused in the marketplace. Perhaps a nice place to sort of start is if you could just clarify what they are and also what the key differences between the two are.
Yes, I mean, you will find in the wild almost as many definitions for those two ideas, service levels and fill rate, as you have companies. But let's say if we stick to, I would say, the academic definitions of those two ideas, of those two concepts, is service levels represent the probability of being able to service an incoming request. So when you say I have 90% service level, what you're saying is that 9 times out of 10, when a customer, which can be an internal customer, within the company, ask you for the good to be delivered, you can fulfill the request. That's the service level. The fill rate is different. It's the percentage of the demand, of the overall demand mass that you can serve. So the question is that when you say that you have 90% fill rate, it means that in total you had, let's say, 100 units that were demanded, and that you've been able to serve 90 of them. So you might be wondering whether there is any difference, but actually there is a difference, and actually it can be, depending on the situation, quite a big difference between the two.
So the thing about an academic approach is it's not always so clear. So perhaps do you have an example we could use to sort of illustrate this?
Let's say a bookstore who is selling books. Let's say we have one book of interest to both to its patrons, and we have two types of clients. We have students who walk into the bookstore and ask for one copy of the books, and once in a while we have a professor that walks into the bookstore and asks for 20 copies at once. And let's say that we have, like, on average, at 20 times more students that we have professor. So in terms of service level, let's imagine that the bookstore has 20 units on a shelf. First, you have 20 students that walk in. Every student asks for one book, so that's good. And so you have 20 units in stock, so you will be able to serve all of those students. And then a professor walks in and asks for 20, and then the bookstore cannot service the professor. So in this case, we have something that is above 90% service level. We had, like, out of 21 people, 20 were served. But in terms of fill rate, we have only 50% fill rate. Why? Because the total demand was 20 units, one book per student, plus 20 books for the professor. So the total demand was 40 units, and the bookstore did only serve 20 books because they had only 20 in stock. So in terms of fill rate, we are at 50%. So you see, service level 90%, 95%, actually above 95, and fill rate 50. So that's the difference between how frequently can you serve your client versus how much of the overall demand can you serve.
So how do you sort of know what is a good fill rate or what is a good service level that you should actually work to? I mean, what is the percentage you should be choosing?
So there is no simple answer to this question, and higher is not necessarily better. So first, there is one confusion, which is, the best would be 100%. No, certainly not. The best service level is not 100%. Why? Because in order to have a better service level, you need more stock, which is increasing your inventory carrying cost and your risk of inventory write-off. And mathematically speaking, a 100% service level means infinite stock, because it means that no matter how unlikely the demand level that is going to emerge in the future, you can address this demand. So if you want to be perfectly sure that you will always have enough stock, you need something that is kind of infinite inventory, which is not a realistic position. Essentially, your service level is a trade-off between the cost of inventory and the cost of not serving your clients. So that's how you can converge toward a good service level.
Okay, and it's something that's implemented a lot of the time into sort of ERP systems. So how is that actually realized in practice? How does it actually work?
So that's interesting. The interesting thing is that in practice, there are several angles to that. I mean, one is first just having a measurement. And here it gets relatively tricky, because the reality is that in theory, service level, you would count how many times you've actually been able to service a request. But in many situations, you do not necessarily record every single request. So let's say, for example, you're an hypermarket. You will not record that somebody was looking for, let's say, a bottle of milk and could not find the bottle of milk on the shelf. You will just record that you had a stock out, because your stock level was, hopefully if your electronic stock records are accurate, you will only record that for the day you did end up at the end of the day with a zero stock level. So most likely, you were not capable of serving clients, but you don't necessarily know exactly how many clients did you miss. So that's when you do not record the actual client request. It's frequently the case in B2C businesses. When you're serving just regular customers, not other businesses. Service level is typically approximated as the percentage of products that are out of stock compared to the total number of products that you have in stock, which is a bit arbitrary, because again, you can have a lot of diversity, and some products might be much more important than others. So there is a lot of, I would say, complication in actually establishing a measurement. But even in the case of, I would say, B2B setup, where you're actually serving businesses and where you might actually record the request, you can end up with a lot of bizarre artifacts as well. You would say, okay, I have a client that requests 1,000 units. I cannot serve this client, but I can record that I've missed those 1,000 units. But so where is the catch? It looks relatively simple. Well, the answer is, well, no, because the next day, the client where you failed at servicing their 1,000 units, they are going to come back and ask for, again, for 1,000 units. The question is that, should you count those two requests as twice 1,000 units, or is it actually the same request where the client just asked for 1,000 units, you said no, they tried other suppliers who also said no, and so the same client is coming back with the same request. And if it's exactly 1,000 units twice in a row, one day and then the next day, well, it's probably the same thing. But and you can identify that. But where it gets more challenging is that in the real world, the client on first day is going to ask for 1,000 units, and then for the second day is going to ask for 1,100. And why? Because they, or something a bit different. Maybe because they found they had more consumption for the stock, so now they need more than what they requested. Or maybe the next day they will come back to you and ask for, let's say, 800 units. And the reality is that they have been able to source 200 units from another supplier, but they're still short of 800 units. So the situation can be quite fuzzy, and that's just the measurement side. Fill rate is even more complicated because sometimes you need to kind of establish all the things that you're missing, and clients might even censor themselves from asking you if you have it available or not.
Okay, so it sounds like the methods can be fairly simplistic, but because of that, there's a lot of things that can slip through the gaps. So is there a better way of illustrating these sort of problems?
I mean, I would say having good measurements is the first step of having a good optimization. So the first step is to really think through about what you're measuring exactly, and is it exactly something that is, I would say, the most desirable measurement for your business. And here, service level and fill rate service level is interesting, but it has clearly, I would say, some very clear limit on what you can do with that. The main problem with service level is that it reflects very, very poorly the pain that you inflict on your clients. It's, yes, you have 90% service level, but what does that really mean? Let's take, for example, an example at, let's say, an Ikea store. You have typically two floors. You have one floor where you're going to find the nice furniture that you were looking for, and a second floor that is a little bazaar where there's plenty of cheap stuff that where you might suddenly have an envy and just pick one additional lamp that you had not really planned. So in this case, if people were looking to buy, let's say, a new bed, and the bed is out of stock, that was the primary reason why they were coming to the IKEA store in the first place, this stock out is going to be very painful for the client, and actually quite painful for IKEA too, because it was an expensive product. On the other hand, if there is a lamp that is missing, a cheap lamp, like a 10 euro lamp, that is missing from the second floor where you have all this bazaar, well, first the client the customer that is walking through the store might not even notice that is out of stock, because the client was not coming for this product in the first place. And then because it's a product that is a bit having like an envy of, a random thing, the client might actually find something else that is also of interest, which is much more unlikely compared to the bed, where you walk into a store looking for a new bed and then you go back from the store with, let's say, a bookshelf. It's much less likely that this scenario to happen. So service level gives you something that is fundamentally not really reflecting, the satisfaction of the client. It's not exactly reflecting your own cost as well, because in terms of cost, the problem with service level is that, yes, you can have an excellent, let's say 98% service level, yes, but what about the inventory write-off? If you have this excellent service level, but the price to pay is that you have enormous amount of inventory write-off, it's not very satisfying as well. So that's for service level. For fill rate gives you something that is a tiny bit more interesting. It gives you kind of an estimate of the total demand that you could potentially serve if you had, infinite inventory, which is, it has some business interest to it, because it's something like the maximal market that you could serve if your supply chain execution was perfect. So at least that gives you one business angle. Downside is that fill rate is quite difficult to estimate, actually difficult to measure, and typically you cannot really measure a fill rate without making some kind of forecast in the middle.
Okay, so it sounds like fill rate is slightly better than the service level. Is there anything out there that is even better than that we should perhaps be measuring?
Yes, what is better is to start introducing the notion of economic drivers. So you really want to keep track of the cost of inventory. So what are the economic drivers that drive your supply chain? It's the cost of inventory, the margin that you get whenever you serve successfully one unit, which can be a bit tricky if it's an internal customer within, let's say, a production unit, for example, but still it exists. So that you have the extra margin, the margin. You have probably the stock out penalty, or the non-service penalty, which is how much economical damage do you do to your customer by not servicing the product, which ultimately is your cost, because you see at some point if a client lose money with you, ultimately they will figure out an alternative supplier. So you will lose it ultimately through loyalty loss. So that's by focusing on those drivers, you can ultimately measure things in dollars or euro that will give you something that is much more tractable for the optimization that follows the optimization of your supply chain. Because the problem is that even if you kind of have a very accurate measurement of the fill rate, it does not necessarily translate into anything that you would do better. You see, the problem, and that's I would say, is looping back to your question of what is a good fill rate. And usually the answer is, well, we just don't know. Why? Because it's a fill rate is a percentage. Yes, you can increase it or decrease it, but until you have plugged those economic drivers, the reality is that you cannot decide for sure that it should be improved. Even if you say, for example, you have, let's say, 80% fill rate, well, in some situations it's just completely acceptable, and actually trying to go above that would let you take enormous risk in terms of inventory write-off. For example, if you're selling strawberries in an hypermarket, I would probably even say that something like 60% fill rate is just fine. So yes, you want to go for stock out pretty much every single day. Why? Because if you don't sell your strawberries the same day, the next day your merchandise will have gone bad, and the value of the merchandise just decline fantastically fast. So you want to have like stock out of at the end of every single day.
Okay, so going back to your Ikea example,
yes.
How would these economic drivers work in that example, and how would they work with the related products?
So in terms of for example, carrying cost, I mean, it's something about establishing whether your inventory lose value over time. So and here, so it's very specific. You know, do you have obsolescence cost? Is there some kind of fashion factor built in? You know, is it something that is long lived? An example of a long lived product would be, let's say, for example, car brakes. You know, it can probably last for a couple of years on the shelf without losing too much of its value. On the contrary, if it's like a T-shirt for an event, it's going like the World Cup. You know, a T-shirt for the next World Cup, it's going to lose its value very, very fast as we reach or even go after the World Cup. So that, and then in terms of but that part is cost. It's typically relatively not easy, but you can measure, I would say, have a hypothesis that are reasonable if with some degree of expertise of your domain. What is more difficult is to establish, you know, the cost for the clients, you know. And here, well, the solution is frequently to ask, if you have the opportunity to ask, but that will be for B2B businesses. You know, to ask is it a problem if this product is not available? For B2C, it's much more tricky because you don't get the opportunity to ask, and then you have to do some kind of loyalty analysis and figure out with correlation whether being out of stock for a given product is really impacting your clients or not. But also common sense does apply. And for example, in hypermarkets, one of the products that is most critical is diapers. So if you're out of stock for diapers, it's a mission critical product for young parents. So usually, I would say most companies have some kind of gut feeling about what are the products that are really critical. The challenge is to organize all those elements so that they can be translated quantitatively.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. With your economic drivers, there's still going to be a little bit of a person's opinion involved. There's still going to be that sort of gut feel we spoke about, that sort of understanding. Who's to say that taking that economic driver approach, because it's still someone's opinion, who's to say that that is any better than just using service levels or fill rates? Why is it better?
So, yes, it's arbitrary, but only to some extent. You see, because let's take the other example. When you say let's let's shoot for 95% service level. Well, why is it even a good target? Maybe because you used to shoot for 95%, because it was like traditional to shoot for 95% service level. But why is that? So you see, the question is a bit reverse. It's very arbitrary if you say that you drive your supply chain by shooting for a given service level versus shooting for specific business drivers. I would say yes, it's arbitrary on both sides. So how can you differentiate between those two? I would argue that economic drivers are better because at least you attempt to do a calculation that is aligned with the strategic vision of what of the purpose of your supply chain. You see, why is it better? It's that at least you're trying to approximate something that is an economic modeling of your supply chain. Maybe your approximation is going to be super crude, but I would say that it's better to be approximately correct rather than exactly wrong. And the point of service level is that of saying that you shoot an arbitrary service level is that it's absolutely wrong in the sense that it's completely arbitrary. There is nothing to back it except tradition. At least when you go for economic drivers, you in the end you're still trying to translate everything into dollars. So you can challenge that those estimation of dollars are accurate and revise them extensively, but still, they cannot be arbitrarily, insane. So for example, what is the stockout cost for diapers in an hypermarket? Let's say, I don't know, a pack of diapers is something like 30 euro, a big pack. And let's say on average you sell 20 a day. So you would say that, well, if you look at the loss of how many did I lose today, and the margin is, let's say, 10%, so 20, 30 euro, 600 euro, the margin was 60 euro for the day. So we'd say, well, the loss, if I just look at the margin, is 60 euro. Let's say we can say that maybe because of the loyalty loss, maybe we have customers that are not going to go back to this hypermarket. Maybe the loss is, let's say, 10 times the margin. So that would be loss is 600 euro. Well, this estimate make kind of sense. If you say the loss is 1,000 times the margin, no, that doesn't make any sense. Can the loss be less than the margin? No, it doesn't make any sense, because if the product had been on the shelf, we would have made that. So you see, it gives you maybe a range where 60 euro, which is directly the margin, is kind of the minimal loss, and let's say 10 times the margin is maybe not the maximal loss, but something like that is starting to be quite heavy and reflect maybe not an upper bound, but something that is already kind of a good estimate of what could the loss be. So you see, you're kind of constrained, because if you start to say, and then your losses are going to be relative. You see, one of the good things with economic drivers is that it doesn't really matter whether you get it absolutely correct. What matters is that the proportion from, they are relative to each other, they are kind of balanced. So also that is something that is easier to achieve, is just balance between the products.
Okay, well, agree that economic drivers then are perhaps more strong. What always kind of amazes me is how in a lot of systems, supply chain managers are sort of very loyal to these techniques that are a little bit out of date. So why is it that they're saying very loyal to things like fill rates? Is it because they're easier to implement? I mean, why is it they're still using them?
So yes, I mean, in many ERPs, you will find some built-in settings to drive your inventory with service levels. So that means that you can say, well, I want these SKUs, this storage keeping unit, at 95% service level, and the system will take care of trying to shoot in terms of reorders for this service level. But there are many gotchas. First gotcha is that while the system gives you a box where you can say go for 95, it does not there is no guarantees that you will effectively hit this target. And that can be relatively tricky, because the reality is that in many systems that we had the chance to audit, frequently you end up with nonsensical service levels, such as 99.5%, but the service level that the company is actually achieving is 97. So there is like a significant disconnect between the entered service level and what they get. So there is kind of a reverse engineering process that is going on in the company to kind of have settings that delivers the service level that they kind of want, but it's not even what they enter. So that's something. And then you might be answering, why is that? Well, the answer is, how does it work under the hood to give you those values? The answer is, underneath you will have a demand forecast and a modelization of the risk of the uncertainty associated to this demand forecast, which is typically going through a safety stock. Without going into the detail and looping back to your question, one of the ways to be, I would say, very loyal to that is that you start with a system that gives you some setting, like service level entry setting, and then you start building your own culture at kind of mitigating the fact that what you enter is not what you get. And that takes a lot of effort, a lot of organization, and at some point, the whole organization becomes kind of entangle its own, I would say, legacy of process, where a good share of the process are actually geared around micromanaging those pseudo service level that you enter into the ERP to get some hopefully better service level as an output. And so that requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of organization, and you end up having a lot of processes around. And so it's not as much as loyalty, such as suddenly if you want to change that, it's like a big initiative within the company, and it challenges tons of things, and it's complicated to change the status quo.
Okay, so that's a nice place to sort of conclude. If you are sort of entangled in these processes, how easy is it to change to taking an economic driver approach, and what can you do? What are the first steps?
So the first step is probably try to step back and get the big picture about what you're trying to optimize. What is the primary mission of the business? How do you really think you can estimate whether you're doing a good job or not? And when you get to the bottom of it, and I would add a second thing, try to think in terms of dollars or euro at the end of the day, because if you cannot measure anything, it's a bit, I would say, an arbitrary statement, but our vision is that if you cannot measure, in terms of economic value what you're doing, you cannot do any kind of supply chain optimization at all. It's like unfortunately that's a requirement. I do not see any alternative to that. So step back, try to have this kind of economic perspective, and then see if when you go back to when you follow this insight of economic modelization of your supply chain, if you end up into a service level optimization, a service level KPI that is really like the good tool to let you execute that, and most likely it's not, and I believe that's probably those high level insights are the starting point to figure out what is a better alternative.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to leave it there, but thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.